When a school nurse notices an 8-year-old boy who always keeps his shirt collar buttoned so tightly it seems uncomfortable, something doesn't add up. Later, what she discovers flips her entire world upside down, igniting a race against time to save an innocent child's life. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up for those who cannot protect themselves, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that matter. At first, Rebecca Walsh thought the child was just following overly strict dress codes, until she discovered the devastating truth that changed everything. Rebecca Walsh had been the head nurse at Oakwood Elementary School for 18 years, and in that time, she developed an almost supernatural ability to spot children who needed help. Her clinic, located on the first floor near the main office, had become a sanctuary for students dealing with everything from scraped knees to serious family crises. The walls were painted in calming sage green, decorated with educational health posters and photos of smiling children from past years, creating an atmosphere that was both professional and welcoming. At 47, Rebecca brought a unique combination of pediatric nursing experience and maternal instinct to her work. Before joining Oakwood Elementary, she'd spent 12 years working in the pediatric ward of Regional Medical Center, where she'd witnessed both the resilience of children and the devastating effects of abuse and neglect. Her transition to school nursing had been motivated by a desire to catch problems earlier, to serve as a protective presence in children's daily lives rather than treating them only after crises had already occurred. Rebecca's office reflected her philosophy of proactive care. Unlike sterile medical environments, her clinic featured comfortable seating areas where anxious children could calm down, a small library of health-related books appropriate for different age groups, and carefully chosen stuffed animals that provided comfort during difficult conversations. Her desk displayed photos of her own family, her husband Tom, a local firefighter, and their twin daughters who were now in high school, visual reminders of the loving homes all children deserved. The school itself served an economically diverse community in suburban Connecticut, where families ranged from affluent professionals to working-class households struggling to make ends meet. Rebecca had developed relationships with families across the spectrum, understanding how financial stress, cultural differences, and varying parenting philosophies could all impact children's health and behavior. Her approach was always the same: observe carefully, listen without judgment, and intervene when necessary to protect vulnerable students. On this particular Monday morning in late November, Rebecca was preparing for what promised to be a busy week. The combination of seasonal illnesses, holiday stress, and the general restlessness that preceded winter break typically increased clinic visits significantly. She was organizing her supply cabinets when a soft knock on her door interrupted her preparations. "Come in," she called, looking up to see Mrs. Franklin, one of the third-grade teachers, entering with a concerned expression. "Rebecca, do you have a moment to discuss one of my students? I've been observing some behaviors that concern me, and I'd value your professional perspective." "Of course," Rebecca replied, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What's on your mind?" "It's about Daniel Morrison. He's 8 years old, transferred to our school about 6 weeks ago when his family moved here from another state." Mrs. Franklin settled into the chair, her brow furrowed with worry. "Academically, he's exceptional, probably reading at a 5th-grade level and demonstrating mathematical reasoning well beyond his peers. But there are other aspects of his behavior that seem unusual." Rebecca picked up a pen and notepad, her professional instincts already engaged. "What specific behaviors have you noticed?" "Several things, but the most obvious is his obsession with keeping his shirt collar buttoned all the way up, even when it's clearly uncomfortable. He wears dress shirts every single day, never t-shirts or polo shirts like most of the other children, and he keeps them buttoned to the very top, even during physical education and outdoor recess when the weather is warm." This detail immediately caught Rebecca's attention. In her experience, children who insisted on covering specific areas of their bodies often had compelling reasons for doing so, and those reasons weren't always innocent. "How does he react if you suggest he might be more comfortable loosening his collar?" "That's what's particularly concerning," Mrs. Franklin continued. "If I even mention his collar, he becomes visibly distressed. Last week, when I gently suggested he might want to unbutton the top button during our outdoor science lesson. It was nearly 70 degrees that day. He actually started shaking and asked if he could call his stepfather. The mention of a stepfather rather than a biological father prompted Rebecca to make additional notes. In her experience, complex family dynamics sometimes contributed to children's behavioral patterns, though she was always careful not to make assumptions about family structures. Tell me more about his general demeanor and interactions with other students. He's incredibly polite, almost formal in his speech patterns. He addresses all adults as sir or ma'am, which isn't necessarily problematic, but it feels excessive for a third grader. He rarely speaks unless directly questioned, and when he does participate in class discussions, his responses are thoughtful but delivered with this underlying tension, as if he's afraid of saying something wrong. Rebecca nodded, recognizing the hypervigilant behavior that often characterized children living in stressful home environments. What about his social interactions with peers? That's another concern. He doesn't seem to know how to play. During recess, while other children are running around, playing games or chatting with friends, Daniel usually sits by himself reading or asks if he can help me organize classroom materials. When other children invite him to join their activities, he politely declines, saying he isn't allowed to get messy, or that he needs to stay clean for home. The phrase about staying clean for home particularly resonated with Rebecca's experience. Children who expressed anxiety about their appearance being scrutinized at home often came from controlling or abusive environments where normal childhood messiness was met with disproportionate consequences. Have you met his family? Spoken with his parents about these behaviors? Mrs. Franklin's expression grew more troubled. That's another unusual aspect of this situation. I've sent several requests home for parent conferences, but they've all been declined. The only communication I've received was a typed letter from his stepfather, Mr. Gregory Morrison, stating that Daniel's behavior and academic performance were family matters and that the school should focus solely on educational instruction. This response pattern immediately raised red flags for Rebecca. In her experience, parents who were invested in their children's well-being were typically eager to collaborate with teachers and school personnel, especially when behavioral concerns were identified. Parents who actively avoided school contact often had reasons for wanting to limit external scrutiny of their family dynamics. What information do you have about the family's background? Any details from his enrollment records? Limited information, which is itself somewhat unusual. The family moved here from Nevada according to the paperwork. Daniel lives with his mother and stepfather. His biological father isn't mentioned in any of the documentation. His mother works as a part-time bookkeeper, and the stepfather is listed as self-employed in consulting, though no specifics are provided. Rebecca made additional notes, already planning her approach for observing Daniel more closely. Has he visited the clinic since enrollment? Any reported illnesses or injuries? Not once, which is actually unusual for a third grader. Most children this age visit the nurse's office at least occasionally for minor issues. Headaches, stomach aches, small injuries from playground activities. Daniel has never requested to see you, even when he's obviously not feeling well. This information added another concerning element to the pattern. Children who avoided seeking help when they were genuinely ill often came from environments where admitting weakness or needing assistance resulted in negative consequences. I'd like to meet with Daniel, perhaps under the pretense of conducting routine health assessments for new students, Rebecca decided. Would you be comfortable facilitating that meeting? Absolutely. I think it's important that someone with your experience and training observes him directly. After Mrs. Franklin left, Rebecca spent the remainder of her morning researching Daniel Morrison's limited school records while formulating her approach for the upcoming interaction. The documentation was notably sparse: basic immunization records, emergency contact information, and academic transcripts from his previous school that showed excellent grades but no behavioral comments or teacher observations. The lack of detailed records struck Rebecca as unusual. Most students transferred with comprehensive files that included teacher comments, behavioral assessments, and notes about social interactions. Daniel's file contained only the bare minimum required for enrollment, suggesting either that his previous school maintained minimal records or that his family had specifically requested limited information transfer. That afternoon, Rebecca sent a message to Mrs. Franklin requesting that Daniel visit the clinic during the last period of the day for a routine health screening for new students. This timing would allow for an extended conversation without disrupting his academic schedule, while also providing privacy for sensitive discussions if they became necessary. At 2:30 p.m., a soft knock on her door announced Daniel's arrival. Rebecca opened the door to find a small, neatly dressed boy standing in the hallway with perfect posture. His hands clasped behind his back in an almost military stance. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Daniel said politely, his voice carrying a formality that seemed unusual for an 8-year-old. "Mrs. Franklin said you wanted to see me for a health check." "That's right, Daniel. Please come in and have a seat," Rebecca replied warmly, gesturing toward the comfortable chair positioned near her desk. "I like to meet with all our new students to make sure they're settling in well, and to answer any questions about staying healthy at school." Daniel entered the clinic with measured steps, his gaze quickly surveying the room as if cataloging potential exits or threats before settling into the indicated chair. His posture remained rigid throughout this process, and Rebecca noticed that his hands immediately moved to his collar, ensuring that every button was securely fastened. "How are you enjoying Oakwood Elementary so far?" Rebecca asked, beginning with a neutral question while observing Daniel's body language and general demeanor. "It's a very good school, ma'am. The teachers are knowledgeable, and the facilities are well maintained," Daniel replied, his response sounding more like a formal evaluation than a child's opinion about his new environment. "That's wonderful to hear. Are you making friends in your class?" Third grade is usually a great time for building friendships. A fleeting expression of sadness crossed Daniel's features before he composed himself. "The other children are nice, ma'am. I'm focusing on my studies right now." Rebecca noted the diplomatic non-answer and the way Daniel deflected from discussing social relationships. "That's important, but it's also good to have fun and play with other children. What do you like to do for fun?" "I enjoy reading, ma'am, and helping with household responsibilities." The response was telling, no mention of games, sports, television shows, or any of the typical interests that engaged most 8-year-olds. Instead, Daniel's idea of enjoyable activities seemed limited to solitary pursuits and adult-supervised tasks. "Reading is fantastic. What kinds of books do you enjoy?" For the first time, Daniel's expression showed genuine enthusiasm. "I like adventure stories and books about science. I'm currently reading about the solar system and learning about different planets." "That sounds fascinating. Do you have a favorite planet?" "Saturn, because of its rings. The way gravity and orbital mechanics create such beautiful, organized patterns is amazing." Rebecca was impressed by Daniel's sophisticated vocabulary and scientific understanding, but she also noticed how he relaxed slightly when discussing neutral, academic topics. This suggested that intellectual achievement was a safe area for him, possibly one where he received positive reinforcement rather than criticism. "You're clearly very smart, Daniel. Your teacher tells me you're doing excellent work in all your subjects." "I try to meet expectations, ma'am," Daniel replied, his posture stiffening again at the mention of expectations. "I'm sure you do. Now, I'd like to do a quick health check. Nothing complicated. Just some basic measurements and making sure you're feeling well. Is that okay with you?" Daniel nodded, though Rebecca noticed increased tension in his shoulders and the way his hands moved protectively to his collar again. Rebecca began with routine measurements, height, weight, and blood pressure, noting that Daniel's vital signs were within normal ranges, but that his blood pressure was slightly elevated, possibly indicating stress or anxiety. Throughout these procedures, Daniel remained cooperative but vigilant, constantly monitoring Rebecca's facial expressions as if watching for signs of disapproval. "Everything looks good so far," Rebecca reported cheerfully. "Now I'd like to check your general health. Look at your throat, listen to your heart and lungs. For that, I'll need you to unbutton your shirt collar so I can use my stethoscope properly." The change in Daniel was immediate and dramatic. His face paled, his breathing became shallow, and his small hands clutched his collar so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I can't do that, ma'am," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not allowed to unbutton my collar at school." Rebecca maintained her calm, professional demeanor despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. Who told you that you weren't allowed to unbutton your collar, Daniel? My stepfather. He says keeping my shirt properly buttoned shows respect and discipline. He checks every day when I come home to make sure I followed his instructions. The explanation confirmed Rebecca's growing suspicions. Adults who required children to maintain specific appearance standards and checked compliance daily were often exercising inappropriate levels of control, particularly when those requirements caused obvious discomfort or interfered with normal activities. I understand that your stepfather has rules about your appearance, Rebecca said carefully. But as the school nurse, I have a responsibility to make sure all students are healthy. Sometimes that requires examining areas that are usually covered by clothing. It's completely normal and professional. Daniel's breathing quickened further, and Rebecca could see perspiration forming on his forehead despite the clinic's comfortable temperature. He'll be very angry if he finds out. He always knows when I've disobeyed him. The fear in Daniel's voice was unmistakable, and the phrase about his stepfather always knowing suggested a level of monitoring and control that extended far beyond normal parental supervision. Daniel, I want you to know that what happens in the nurse's office is confidential, Rebecca explained gently. My job is to take care of you and make sure you're safe and healthy. If someone is making you afraid or hurting you, I can help. Nobody's hurting me, Daniel replied quickly, though his voice lacked conviction and his protective posture suggested otherwise. Rebecca recognized the automatic denial that many abused children provided when directly questioned about their treatment. Years of experience had taught her that pushing too hard too quickly often resulted in children retreating further into protective silence. Okay, Daniel, I respect that, she said, though she was already planning her next steps. Let me ask you this. Are you ever sore or uncomfortable around your neck or throat? Sometimes tight collars can cause irritation. Daniel's hesitation before answering was telling. Sometimes it's a little sore, but that's normal. Stepfather says proper grooming sometimes requires discomfort. The rationalization embedded in Daniel's response, the idea that discomfort was an acceptable price for meeting someone else's standards, was consistent with the psychological manipulation often used by abusive caregivers to justify their controlling or harmful behaviors. Can you show me where it feels sore? I don't need you to unbutton anything. Just point to the areas that are uncomfortable. Tentatively, Daniel raised his hand toward his neck, indicating areas around his collar line and throat. As he did so, Rebecca noticed what appeared to be slight discoloration at the edge of his collar. A dark mark that was barely visible but suggested bruising underneath the fabric. Daniel, I'm going to be honest with you, Rebecca said, her voice gentle but serious. I'm concerned about your health and well-being. The soreness you're describing, combined with some other things I've observed, makes me think someone might be hurting you. If that's happening, it's not your fault, and there are people who can help. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, though he fought to maintain his composure. I can't talk about family matters, ma'am. Stepfather says family business should stay private. That's true for most family matters, Rebecca agreed. But when someone is being hurt or scared, especially a child, that's when other adults need to step in to help. It's not tattling or being disloyal. It's getting the help you deserve. For a long moment, Daniel stared at his hands, clearly struggling with internal conflict. Rebecca could see the battle between his desire for help and his fear of consequences playing out across his young features. What if? What if I showed you something, but you promised not to tell him I showed you? Daniel asked quietly. I can promise that I'll use any information you share with me to help you, not to get you in trouble, Rebecca replied carefully. But if someone is hurting you, I might need to involve other adults whose job it is to protect children. Would that be okay? After another long pause, Daniel gave a tiny nod. With trembling fingers, he began slowly unbuttoning his collar. What Rebecca saw when Daniel's neck was finally exposed made her struggle to maintain her professional composure. Dark bruises encircled the boy's throat in a pattern consistent with manual strangulation, some fresh and purple, others fading to yellow and green. There were also what appeared to be rope burns along his neck, suggesting that restraints had been used repeatedly over time. Oh, Daniel, Rebecca breathed, her voice thick with emotion and barely controlled anger. "Who did this to you?" "My stepfather," Daniel whispered, tears streaming down his face as he finally spoke the truth he'd been forced to hide. "When I make mistakes or when he's having a bad day. He says it's discipline to help me learn respect and obedience." Rebecca's hands shook slightly as she photographed the evidence with the clinic's specialized camera, documenting the horrific abuse while providing gentle reassurance to Daniel. The pattern and severity of the injuries indicated systematic, ongoing abuse that had likely been escalating over time. "How long has this been happening, Daniel?" "Since Mom married him about 2 years ago. At first it was just grabbing, but it got worse when we moved here. He says the new job is stressful, and I need to be more careful not to upset him." The timeline and escalation pattern confirmed Rebecca's worst fears. Daniel had been suffering systematic abuse for years, with the recent move possibly serving to isolate him from any previous support systems or observant adults who might have noticed signs of his mistreatment. "What about your mother? Does she know what your stepfather is doing?" Daniel's expression grew more complex, revealing the complicated dynamics that often existed in households where one parent abused children while the other remained uninvolved or unaware. "Sometimes she sees the marks, but stepfather tells her I fell or got hurt playing. She works a lot now, and she's always tired. He says bothering her with complaints would make her sicker and sadder." Rebecca recognized the manipulation being used to isolate Daniel from his mother's protection, convincing him that seeking help would harm the very person he most wanted to protect. "Daniel, what your stepfather is doing is very wrong," Rebecca said firmly. "No child should ever be hurt like this, no matter what they've done or how stressed an adult is feeling. This is not discipline. This is abuse, and it's against the law." "Will I get in trouble for telling?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with the same terror Rebecca had heard from countless other young victims. "You will absolutely not get in trouble for telling the truth," Rebecca assured him. "You're being incredibly brave right now, and that bravery is going to help make sure you're safe from now on." The next several hours unfolded with practiced efficiency born from Rebecca's extensive experience with child abuse cases. She immediately contacted Child Protective Services, emphasizing the severity and immediacy of the danger Daniel faced. The physical evidence of strangulation, one of the most lethal forms of domestic violence, required emergency intervention rather than routine investigation. Rebecca then called the police department's specialized child abuse unit, knowing that the criminal nature of Daniel's injuries would require law enforcement involvement. She also contacted the school principal, Dr. Martinez, to ensure that Daniel would remain under protective supervision until authorities could implement a comprehensive safety plan. Daniel remained in the clinic under Rebecca's direct care while authorities responded, his emotional state fluctuating between relief at finally telling the truth and terror about potential consequences. Rebecca provided ongoing reassurance while completing detailed medical documentation that would serve as crucial evidence in both criminal proceedings and custody determination. Detective James Rodriguez arrived first, his specialized training in child abuse cases and gentle manner immediately helping to put Daniel more at ease. Detective Rodriguez had worked with Rebecca on previous cases and understood the delicate balance required to gather necessary information while protecting the child's emotional well-being. "Hi, Daniel," Detective Rodriguez said softly, settling into a chair positioned at the boy's eye level. "Nurse Rebecca told me you've been very brave today by telling the truth about some adults who have been hurting you. I'm here because it's my job to make sure children are safe, and I need to ask you some questions about what's been happening at home." While Daniel provided his account of the abuse, describing years of escalating violence disguised as discipline, social isolation enforced through fear of consequences, and psychological manipulation designed to convince him that he deserved the treatment he received, Rebecca completed increasingly detailed medical documentation. Daniel's disclosure revealed systematic abuse that extended far beyond the physical injuries visible on his neck. He described being forced to stand perfectly still for hours while his stepfather criticized his behavior, being denied food for days when his household chores didn't meet impossible standards, and being isolated from other children because his stepfather claimed that Daniel's bad influence might corrupt them. Most heartbreakingly, Daniel revealed that his stepfather had convinced him that his mother's health problems were caused by stress from his misbehavior, creating a devastating psychological burden that prevented Daniel from seeking help for fear of making his mother's condition worse. "You've been incredibly brave telling us all of this," Detective Rodriguez assured Daniel when the interview concluded. "Because you told us the truth, we can make sure your stepfather never hurts you again, and we can help your mother understand what's really been happening." Child Protective Services caseworker Maria Santos arrived shortly after the police interview concluded, bringing with her the authority and paperwork necessary to immediately remove Daniel from his stepfather's custody. Her experience with emergency placements helped her explain to Daniel what would happen next in terms he could understand while providing reassurance about his immediate safety. "Daniel, you're not going to go home with your stepfather today, or ever again," Maria explained gently. "We're going to find you a safe place to stay with people who know how to take care of children who have been hurt. And we're going to make sure your mother gets the help she needs to understand what happened and to make better choices about keeping you safe." "Where will I go?" Daniel asked, this question carrying both hope and understandable anxiety about yet another major change in his young life. "I have a family in mind who specializes in caring for boys in situations exactly like yours," Maria replied. "Their names are Michael and Susan Chun, and they've been helping children for many years. They understand how to help kids feel safe again after they've been hurt by adults who were supposed to protect them." By evening, Daniel found himself in the home of Michael and Susan Chun, experienced therapeutic foster parents who had been caring for traumatized children for over 12 years. Their warm, child-centered home had been specifically designed to provide comfort and safety for children recovering from abuse, featuring calming colors, natural lighting, and carefully chosen furnishings that created an atmosphere of security rather than institutional care. "We're so happy to meet you, Daniel," Susan said gently as she knelt down to Daniel's eye level in their living room. "We know today has been really scary and confusing, but you don't have to be afraid anymore. Our job is to help you feel safe and happy, while other adults make sure you never have to be hurt again." Daniel, now wearing a comfortable t-shirt provided by the foster family instead of his constraining dress shirt, looked around the unfamiliar environment with cautious wonder. The house felt different from any place he'd ever lived, warm instead of tense, welcoming instead of threatening, filled with books and games and evidence of children who had been allowed to be children. "Do I have rules I need to follow?" Daniel asked quietly, this question revealing how his entire life experience had been shaped by arbitrary punitive regulations designed to control rather than guide. "Just gentle house rules that help families live together happily," Michael replied with a warm smile, settling into a nearby chair so their conversation could continue at Daniel's eye level. "Things like being kind to each other, letting us know if you need anything, and understanding that mistakes are normal parts of learning. We want you to feel comfortable here." "What if I make a mistake?" Daniel asked, this question carrying the weight of years of conditioning that had taught him to fear normal human error. The question broke both foster parents' hearts, but Susan answered with steady warmth and absolute conviction. "Everyone makes mistakes, Daniel. That's how people learn and grow. When mistakes happen, we help each other figure out how to do better next time, or we fix whatever needs fixing, or sometimes we just laugh about it if it's something silly. No one ever gets hurt in this house for making mistakes. That's a promise." Daniel's eyes widened at this revolutionary concept, the idea that mistakes could be learning opportunities rather than crimes requiring punishment, that accidents could be met with understanding rather than violence. Over the following days, Daniel began the gradual process of learning to live without constant fear, though his healing would clearly require extensive time and professional support. The Chin family, trained in trauma-informed care and experienced with children recovering from severe abuse, provided structure without rigidity, offering Daniel choices he'd never been allowed to make while maintaining the consistency and security he needed to begin trusting again. Rebecca visited daily, both to monitor Daniel's medical recovery and to witness the child's remarkable transformation. Within the first week, Daniel was speaking more naturally, without the careful self-monitoring that had characterized his communication before. He laughed at Michael's silly jokes during dinner, showed genuine curiosity about the books that filled the Chin home, and began displaying the natural enthusiasm and wonder that had been suppressed under his stepfather's control. Most significantly, Daniel began asking questions about how families were supposed to work, about why some adults hurt children while others protected them, about whether his mother would be safe without him there to absorb his stepfather's anger. These questions, while sometimes difficult to answer, represented crucial steps in his psychological healing. 2 weeks after Daniel's placement, Detective Rodriguez brought news that ensured Daniel's permanent safety and began providing closure to questions that had haunted the boy's recovery. Gregory Morrison had been arrested at his workplace and charged with multiple counts of child abuse, child endangerment, and domestic violence. Evidence found during the search of his residence revealed a pattern of systematic abuse that extended beyond Daniel to include psychological and financial abuse of Daniel's mother. More importantly for Daniel's healing process, the investigation had revealed that his mother, Jennifer Morrison, had been unaware of the extent of the abuse Daniel was suffering. Gregory had carefully isolated both mother and son, convincing Jennifer that her health problems required her to limit her interactions with Daniel while convincing Daniel that seeking help would worsen his mother's condition. What this means, Maria Santos explained during a meeting with Rebecca and the Chin family, is that Daniel's mother is working with us to understand what happened and to make sure she can provide a safe home for him in the future. She's entered counseling and is taking steps to end her relationship with Gregory permanently. When they shared this news with Daniel, his reaction was complex. Relief that his mother hadn't been complicit in his abuse, hope that he might be able to return to her care eventually, and growing understanding that his suffering hadn't been his fault. "So Mom didn't know he was hurting me?" Daniel asked, this question revealing how much guilt he'd been carrying about his mother's apparent indifference to his pain. "She didn't know," Susan confirmed, showing Daniel photos of his mother visiting with social workers and beginning the process of creating a safe home. "Your stepfather was very good at hiding what he was doing and making both you and your mom think that telling the truth would make things worse." Daniel studied the photographs with intense concentration, seeing evidence that his mother was actively working to protect him rather than abandoning him as he'd been led to believe. "Will I be able to see her?" Daniel asked hopefully. "Yes, once the counselors and social workers think it's safe for both of you," Michael assured him. "And until then, she knows you're safe and loved here with us." 3 weeks after his rescue, Daniel had begun displaying remarkable resilience and healing capacity that amazed even the experienced professionals working with him. His natural intelligence, which had been channeled into survival strategies under his stepfather's abuse, now flourished in the safe environment provided by the Chan family. Rebecca was completing her daily documentation when Daniel appeared in her clinic doorway one afternoon, now wearing a casual polo shirt with the collar comfortably unbuttoned, a sight that filled her with profound satisfaction and hope. "Nurse Rebecca, look what I made for you." Daniel approached her desk with a detailed drawing that depicted a house surrounded by trees, with stick figures representing his foster family under a bright blue sky. In careful third-grade handwriting, he had written, "Thank you for helping me be safe," across the bottom. "This is absolutely beautiful, Daniel," Rebecca said, accepting the drawing with genuine admiration while feeling tears threaten to overwhelm her professional composure. "You look so happy in this picture." "I am happy," Daniel declared with growing confidence, his voice carrying none of the careful modulation that had characterized his speech during his months of suffering. "Michael and Susan say I'm a good kid, and they like having me as part of their family, and they're teaching me how to play games and have fun." The simple statement revealed how much healing had already occurred, Daniel understanding that childhood should include joy and play, not just academic achievement and fearful compliance. "They're absolutely right about you being a good kid," Rebecca confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "You deserve to be happy and safe and loved exactly as you are." As Daniel headed back to his classroom, moving with the relaxed confidence of a child who no longer feared punishment for normal behavior, Rebecca reflected on the transformation she'd witnessed. In the space of just weeks, a terrified, controlled child had become someone who could express genuine happiness, make personal choices, and trust in adult protection and care. For months later, Rebecca received news that filled her with professional satisfaction and personal joy. Daniel's mother had successfully completed her counseling program and had taken steps to ensure Gregory Morrison could never contact their family again. More importantly, she had demonstrated consistent commitment to Daniel's safety and well-being, leading to a plan for Daniel's gradual return to her care. The transition will be carefully managed, Maria Santos explained during a final meeting. Daniel will continue living with the Chun family while spending increasing amounts of time with his mother, until everyone is confident that the home environment is completely safe and supportive. When Rebecca shared this news with Daniel during his final routine visit to her clinic, his reaction was one of pure joy tempered by appropriate caution. The response of a child who had learned to hope again while maintaining healthy awareness of potential risks. So I get to live with Mom again, but Michael and Susan will still be my friends? Daniel asked, working to understand the complex arrangements being made for his benefit. That's exactly right, Rebecca confirmed. You're going to have lots of people who care about you and want to make sure you're always safe and happy. Daniel's smile was radiant, the expression of a child who had moved from isolation and fear to being surrounded by a protective network of caring adults. 6 months after his rescue, Daniel returned to Rebecca's clinic for a routine checkup, now living happily with his mother in a new apartment across town. He bounded through the door wearing a t-shirt and shorts, his neck completely unmarked by fresh injuries, his face bright with the confidence and joy of a child who knew himself to be loved and protected. "Nurse Rebecca, guess what?" Daniel announced proudly as Rebecca conducted her examination. "Mom and I are going to visit Michael and Susan this weekend, and they're going to teach me how to ride a bicycle." The gesture of trust represented by Daniel's excitement about normal childhood activities, his assumption that adventures would be fun rather than opportunities for criticism or punishment, represented the highest possible outcome for intervention in child abuse cases. "That sounds like the most wonderful adventure," Rebecca replied, completing her examination while marveling at the complete transformation from the terrified child who had once hidden brutal injuries under a tightly buttoned collar. Stories like these remind us that school nurses serve as crucial guardians for vulnerable children, combining medical expertise with compassionate observation to identify those suffering in silence. Every day, heroes like Rebecca are making these life-saving discoveries through careful attention to the signs that something isn't right. But how many children are still hiding their pain behind carefully maintained appearances, waiting for someone to notice and care enough to help? Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more. When a middle school English teacher notices one of her most promising students disappearing into the library every lunch period, refusing to join his peers in the cafeteria, something about his increasingly withdrawn behavior begins to concern her. What began as simple curiosity about a quiet child's lunchtime habits would soon reveal a heartbreaking situation that had been silently unfolding for months. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that sometimes the smallest acts of noticing can change a life forever, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that matter. She couldn't have known that her simple question about his lunchtime whereabouts would unveil a story of struggle and resilience that would transform an entire community, until she discovered the first hidden journal that changed everything. Emma Bennett had been teaching 7th grade English at Oak Ridge Middle School for 6 years. At 32, her creative approach to literature and genuine interest in her students' lives had made her a favorite among both children and parents in the suburban community. With her warm smile and tendency to gesture expressively when discussing beloved books, Ms. Bennett, Ms. B, to her students, created a classroom environment where even reluctant readers found themselves drawn into the world of words. She believed firmly that stories were more than just assignments. They were windows into understanding both ourselves and others. Her classroom reflected this philosophy, walls lined with bookshelves organized not by reading level but by theme and emotion, allowing students to find stories that spoke to their current experiences. Reading nooks with comfortable pillows occupied the corners, and student artwork inspired by literature hung alongside quotes from diverse authors. The room felt less like a traditional classroom and more like a well-loved library, with the subtle scent of paper and the faint hint of the lavender essential oil Emma occasionally diffused to create a calming atmosphere on test days. Emma lived in a small but charming apartment about 15 minutes from the school, where she spent evenings grading papers with her rescue cat, Fitzgerald, nearby. She had moved to Oak Ridge fresh out of graduate school, drawn by the district's reputation for supporting teacher autonomy and creative curriculum development. Though not originally from the area, She had built meaningful connections with colleagues and become an active member of the community, volunteering at the local library's literacy program and organizing an annual book drive for underfunded schools in neighboring districts. Principal Diane Morales valued Emma's contributions to Oak Ridge Middle School. "You have a gift for seeing the student behind the behavior," she had told Emma during her last evaluation. "You connect with them as individuals first, learners second, and that's why they respond to you so positively." Emma had accepted the praise graciously, though she considered such connection a fundamental part of teaching rather than a special talent. School counselor Marcus Wright had become one of Emma's closest colleagues at Oak Ridge. They frequently collaborated on supporting students facing challenges, with Emma often being the first to notice subtle shifts in behavior or academic performance that warranted further attention. Marcus appreciated her insights, often remarking that Emma noticed patterns in student behavior that others missed. "You see the stories they're not telling," he'd once commented. There had been conversations at recent faculty meetings about the growing economic disparity within their district. While Oak Ridge had traditionally served a solidly middle-class population, recent years had seen increasing numbers of families facing financial hardship due to the closure of a major manufacturing plant on the edge of town. The impacts were becoming visible in various ways: more students qualifying for free lunch programs, increased requests for assistance with school supplies, and some families moving mid-year as housing situations became unstable. One afternoon in early October, Emma had encountered an unfamiliar woman speaking intently with Principal Morales outside the main office. The woman, who she later learned was Councilwoman Patricia Harrington, had smiled coolly when introduced, her designer suit and perfect manicure creating a sharp contrast with the practical environment of the middle school. There was something calculated in her brief handshake and the way she spoke about maintaining the character of our district that left Emma with a lingering sense of unease about the political priorities shaping their community. Autumn had settled over the small town of Oak Ridge, bringing crisp mornings and golden afternoons that transformed the school grounds into a canvas of red and orange. The middle school, a two-story brick building constructed in the 1960s and renovated a decade ago, sat on a gently sloping hill overlooking a neighborhood of modest, well-kept homes. Inside, the hallways hummed with the organized chaos typical of middle school's students navigating social hierarchies as they navigated the path to different classrooms, teachers maintaining order while nurturing the emerging independence of their adolescent charges. It was during this season of transition that Emma first began to notice something unusual about Tyler Reynolds, a seventh grader who had started the year as one of her most engaged students but had grown increasingly withdrawn as October progressed. The boy was of average height for his 12 years, with thoughtful brown eyes and a quick mind that allowed him to make connections between texts that sometimes surprised even Emma. His essays showed remarkable depth for his age, often exploring themes of belonging and identity with unusual insight. But nothing could prepare Emma for the mystery that would unfold around Tyler's lunchtime disappearances. The first time Emma really took notice was during a week when she was using her lunch periods to organize an upcoming poetry contest. Passing through the library to speak with the school librarian, she glimpsed Tyler sitting alone in a far corner, hunched over what appeared to be a notebook rather than lunch. She didn't interrupt him then, but made a mental note when she saw him in the same spot the following day, and the day after that. "Tyler seems to be spending all his lunch periods in the library," Emma mentioned casually to Mara Chen, the school librarian, during their planning meeting. "Is he working on a special project?" Mara nodded thoughtfully. "He's been coming in every day for about 3 weeks now. Always sits in the same spot, doesn't really browse the shelves much. I thought he might be avoiding the cafeteria social scene. You know how middle school can be. But there's something," she hesitated, searching for the right word, "purposeful about it. Like he's not just hiding, he's doing something specific." Emma considered this information. While some students naturally sought the quiet of the library over the chaos of the lunchroom, Tyler had never struck her as particularly shy or socially anxious. In fact, he had started the year with several friends and had participated actively in class discussions. The change in his behavior had been gradual but undeniable, not just the lunchtime isolation, but decreasing participation in class, occasional missed assignments, and a general air of exhaustion that hadn't been present in September. "I think I'll check in with him," Emma decided. His writing has been different lately too, still good, but focusing on themes of secrecy and burden. I just want to make sure everything's okay. The next day, Emma deliberately timed her visit to the library during lunch period. She found Tyler in his usual corner, so absorbed in writing in a worn composition notebook that he didn't notice her approach until she was standing beside his table. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" she asked, careful to keep her tone casual. Tyler startled visibly, quickly closing the notebook and placing his arm over it in a protective gesture that struck Emma as both deliberate and practiced. Sure, Ms. Bennett," he replied, though his expression suggested the opposite. Emma sat down, noting the absence of any lunch. "I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time in here lately," she began. "The cafeteria can be pretty overwhelming sometimes." "It's just quieter here," Tyler responded with a shrug that aimed for nonchalance but didn't quite achieve it. "I can think better." "You're working on writing?" Emma gestured toward the notebook he was still partially shielding. "Just stuff. Nothing for class." His response was swift, almost defensive. Emma nodded, taking a different approach. "I noticed you didn't turn in your reading response yesterday. That's not like you. Is everything okay, Tyler?" A flash of something, panic, guilt, crossed his face before he composed himself. "Yeah, sorry about that. I forgot it at home. I'll bring it tomorrow." The conversation continued briefly, with Tyler providing short, carefully crafted responses that revealed nothing while clearly trying to end the interaction. Emma didn't push further that day, recognizing the walls he had erected, but her concern had only deepened. Something in his demeanor suggested not typical teenage withdrawal but a more specific worry or burden. "I think something's going on with Tyler Reynolds," she told Marcus during their weekly check-in meeting the next day. "The pattern doesn't feel like regular middle school social issues. He's isolating himself deliberately. His academic work is becoming uneven, and there's an anxiousness to him that seems new." The counselor reviewed Tyler's file on his computer. "His attendance is still good, no behavior issues. Parents divorced 3 years ago. Lives primarily with his mother, weekend visitation with father. No previous counseling referrals." He looked up at Emma. "What specifically concerns you?" Emma considered how to articulate her worry. "It's the intensity of his withdrawal. And I've noticed other things. He's wearing the same few clothes repeatedly. Sometimes looks like he hasn't slept well. Occasionally seems hungry, but I've never seen him with lunch. When I tried to talk to him yesterday, he was almost guarding his notebook, like he was afraid I'd see what he was writing." Marcus made a note in his file. "Have you contacted the mother?" "I sent an email last week about the missing assignments, but got no response. I tried calling the number on file yesterday, but it was disconnected." "That's concerning," Marcus agreed. "Let me try the father's contact information, and I'll see if I can connect with Tyler today or tomorrow. In the meantime, keep building that trust. If something is going on, you might be the adult he eventually opens up to." But nothing could have prepared Emma for what she would discover the following week. The revelation came during a rainy Thursday, when the library was unusually crowded with students avoiding the wet outdoor areas usually available during lunch period. Emma, on supervision duty, noticed Tyler enter, scan the crowded room with visible dismay, then quickly exit again. Curious and concerned, she followed at a distance and observed him trying several doors along the hallway, most locked, before slipping into the small conference room adjacent to the main office. This behavior struck her as deliberate and secretive enough to warrant intervention. After giving him a few minutes, Emma approached the conference room and knocked lightly before opening the door. Tyler sat at the conference table, his notebook open, several loose papers spread around him, and most concerning, what appeared to be half of a sandwich that he was eating with the deliberate slowness of someone making food last. He looked up at Emma with an expression of such naked panic that she immediately regretted the intrusion. "Tyler, I'm sorry to disturb you," she said gently. "I saw you leave the library and wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," he insisted, hastily gathering his papers. "The library was just crowded. I'll go somewhere else." "You don't have to go," Emma assured him. still standing in the doorway to avoid making him feel trapped. I'm just concerned because you seem to be avoiding the cafeteria completely, and now I notice you have only half a sandwich for lunch. Tyler's eyes darted to the door behind her, clearly calculating whether this conversation could be avoided. Something in Emma's expression must have convinced him it couldn't, because his shoulders slumped slightly in resignation. "It's not a big deal," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I just like being alone at lunch." Emma took a careful step into the room, closing the door partially for privacy. "Tyler, I've been teaching long enough to know when a student is dealing with something difficult. Whatever it is, I'd like to help if I can." The boy looked down at his half sandwich, then at the scattered pages filled with what Emma could now see were careful calculations and lists. After a long moment of internal struggle visible on his face, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a second notebook, more worn than the first. "If I show you something, do you promise not to tell everyone? Like, you won't make a big announcement to the class or tell all the other teachers?" "I promise to respect your privacy," Emma said carefully, "though if what you show me suggests you're in danger or someone is hurting you, I would need to get appropriate help. That's my responsibility as your teacher." Tyler considered this, then slowly slid the notebook across the table to her. "It's not like that. Nobody's hurting me. It's just complicated." Emma sat down and opened the notebook. Inside were methodical entries spanning several months, detailed ledgers of household expenses, calculations of income and outflow, and carefully planned budgets allocated across weeks. The handwriting was unmistakably Tyler's, but the content belonged in an adult's financial planner, not a 12-year-old's notebook. As she turned the pages, the situation became heartbreakingly clear. Notes like, "Mom's hours cut again. Electric past due. Need $4,376 by Friday. And these shoes wait until next month," told the story that Tyler hadn't been able to verbalize. Most revealing was a section labeled Lunch Money Strategy that outlined how to stretch $10 across 2 weeks by buying half sandwiches and sometimes skipping lunch entirely. Emma felt her throat tighten as the full picture emerged. "Tyler," she said softly, looking up from the notebook, "you've been managing your family's finances." It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway, something like relief crossing his face now that someone else knew. "Since Dad left, Mom's had to work 2 jobs. She tries really hard, but she's not good with numbers and gets overwhelmed by all the bills. I'm good at math, so I started helping her keep track of things." His voice took on a matter-of-fact tone that was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the situation. This responsibility had become normal to him. "That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age," Emma observed gently. "Is that why you come to the library or find empty rooms during lunch?" Tyler nodded again. "I need quiet to figure things out." And sometimes he hesitated, then continued with reluctant honesty. "Sometimes I don't have lunch money, so it's easier to just say I prefer the library than explain why I'm not eating." The conversation that followed revealed more details of Tyler's situation. His mother, Jessica Reynolds, was working morning shifts at a local diner and evening shifts at a convenience store, often leaving Tyler alone for significant periods. The family had moved to a smaller apartment after the divorce, and recent cuts to his mother's hours had created a financial crisis that had been building for months. Tyler had gradually taken on not just the budgeting but bill payments, grocery planning, and even decisions about which necessities could be delayed when money ran short. "Mom's really trying," he emphasized repeatedly, his loyalty evident. "She's just really tired all the time, and when the bills come, she gets the scared look. I'm better at figuring out what to pay first and how to make the money stretch." "Does your father help financially?" Emma asked carefully. Tyler's expression darkened slightly. "He's supposed to send money every month, but he usually doesn't. When Mom calls about it, they end up fighting and then she gets sad. So I told her to stop asking him." The maturity and self-sacrifice evident in this statement, a child choosing to go without rather than see his mother upset, struck Emma profoundly. "Tyler, what you've been doing is incredibly brave and responsible, but it's not something you should have to handle alone. There are resources that could help your family during this difficult time. Fear flashed across his face. "You're not going to call CPS, are you? My mom's a good mom. She's just struggling right now. If they take me away—" "No," Emma interrupted gently but firmly. "This isn't about taking you away from your mother. It's about connecting your family with support systems that already exist for exactly these situations." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Would your mother be open to meeting with me and Mr. Wright to discuss some options?" Tyler considered this, his natural protectiveness toward his mother evident in his hesitation. "Maybe, but she works all the time, and she gets embarrassed about the money stuff. What if we arranged the meeting around her schedule and approached it as finding resources for your educational support, not as criticism of your situation?" Emma suggested. "We could start there and then introduce other types of assistance." After further discussion and reassurance that this intervention aimed to support his family rather than separate it, Tyler agreed to a meeting. Emma provided him with a proper lunch from her own bag, insisting it was extra food she wouldn't eat, preserving his dignity while addressing his immediate hunger. That afternoon, Emma met with Marcus to develop a support plan. The counselor's experience with similar situations provided valuable insight into available resources and sensitive approaches to families in financial crisis. "The most immediate concern is food security," Marcus noted as they compiled information. "Then stable housing, utility assistance, and employment support for the mother. But we need to address the emotional aspect too. Tyler has taken on an adult role that's inappropriate for his development stage, even though his intentions are admirable. And we need to consider his academic support," Emma added. "He's clearly brilliant with numbers and incredibly organized, but some of his other work has been suffering while he's focused on keeping his family afloat." The meeting with Jessica Reynolds was arranged for early morning later that week, before her shift at the diner. The young mother arrived looking exhausted but defensive, clearly prepared to protect both her son and her parental authority. However, Emma's compassionate approach and Marcus's clear explanation of available resources gradually broke through her initial resistance. "Tyler shouldn't have had to take all this on," Jessica said at one point, tears forming in her eyes. "I knew he was helping with the budget, but I didn't realize how much he was worrying about everything. I get so overwhelmed sometimes." "Parenting is challenging even with abundant resources," Marcus assured her. "What you're doing, working multiple jobs, maintaining a home, takes enormous strength. We're not here to judge, but to connect you with supports that can ease some of these burdens." By the end of the meeting, several concrete steps had been established. Tyler would begin receiving free breakfast and lunch at school. The family would be connected with a local food pantry. Applications were initiated for utility assistance and affordable housing programs, and Jessica would meet with a career counselor at the community college to explore training programs that might lead to higher-paying employment opportunities. For Tyler, an immediate burden was lifted simply by having other adults aware of and addressing his family's situation. Emma arranged for him to have access to a quiet corner of her classroom during lunch periods where he could complete homework or simply decompress without either hiding his lack of lunch or explaining his situation to peers. She also connected him with the school's peer tutoring program, not because he needed academic help, but because it provided a legitimate reason for him to stay after school several days a week when his mother was working, offering structured activity and adult supervision. The changes didn't happen overnight, but over the following weeks, subtle shifts became apparent. Tyler began participating more actively in class again as the constant pressure of family finances eased. The dark circles under his eyes gradually faded as his sleep improved. Most noticeably, his writing changed, moving away from themes of burden and secret-keeping toward explorations of community and unexpected support. A key breakthrough came just before winter break, when Emma discovered Tyler in her classroom during lunch, not working on household budgets but writing what appeared to be a story. When she inquired about it, he somewhat shyly admitted it was a science fiction tale he'd been thinking about for months but hadn't had the mental space to develop. "Mom's been handling the bills herself for the past 2 weeks," he explained with a mix of pride and lingering concern. "She has a system now with folders and a calendar. She still asks me to check her math sometimes, but she says I need to focus on kid stuff for a while." Emma recognized this as a significant positive step in restoring appropriate family roles, though she knew the transition wouldn't be seamless after months of reversed responsibilities. "That's wonderful, Tyler. And how does that feel for you?" The boy considered the question with the thoughtfulness that characterized him. "Kind of weird, actually. I still worry sometimes. But also, lighter? Like I can think about other things now." He gestured to his science fiction story. "Like this." As winter turned to spring, the support systems put in place for the Reynolds family began to show more substantial results. Jessica had entered a medical office assistant training program that would allow her to seek higher-paying, single-job employment with regular hours. The family had moved into a subsidized apartment that was actually closer to the school, reducing transportation challenges. Most importantly, both Tyler and his mother were receiving counseling, Jessica through a community program, and Tyler with Marcus during school hours. The transformation in Tyler himself was remarkable to witness. He had always been intelligent, but now his natural creativity and curiosity re-emerged as constant survival worry receded. He joined the school's math team, where his exceptional skills with numbers became a source of positive recognition rather than a tool for managing family crisis. He began spending lunch periods with friends again, sometimes still visiting the library but now to explore books rather than hide his hunger. Emma kept a watchful eye on his progress, maintaining the special connection that had developed through her intervention. She created opportunities for his writing talents to shine, encouraging him to develop the science fiction story that had become something of a passion project. When a regional young authors contest was announced in April, she specifically encouraged him to enter, helping him refine and polish his work during advisory periods. The story Tyler ultimately submitted a thoughtful exploration of a young boy who discovers his ability to see mathematical patterns in the universe can help prevent disasters. Won first place in the middle school division. The public recognition was significant for a child who had spent so long operating in secrecy and carrying hidden burdens. "The story isn't really about math," Tyler confided to Emma after the awards ceremony, where his mother, beaming with pride, had watched him receive recognition. "It's about how sometimes the things that make you different also make you important, and about how problems are easier when you don't face them alone." The wisdom in this observation, from a student who had learned these lessons through genuine hardship rather than simply academic study, struck Emma deeply. As the school year approached its end, Emma received news that would bring the Reynolds journey full circle. The district was launching a new community support initiative for the following academic year, creating a family resource center within the school where parents could access information about assistance programs, employment opportunities, continuing education, and counseling services. Principal Morales asked Emma to serve on the planning committee, specifically citing her successful intervention with the Reynolds family as a model for the holistic support they hoped to provide. "Your advocacy for Tyler and his mother demonstrated exactly what we want this center to accomplish," the principal explained. "Addressing the whole family's needs to support student success, without judgment or bureaucratic obstacles." Even more significant was the news that Jessica Reynolds had been offered a position as a parent liaison for the new center, where her lived experience navigating financial hardship while supporting a child's education would prove invaluable to other families in similar situations. The part-time role would complement her newly obtained medical office position, providing stable employment with hours compatible with parenting. At the final parent-teacher conference of the year, the transformation was evident in both Tyler and his mother. Jessica arrived in scrubs from her medical office externship, carrying a planner not unlike the one Tyler had once used to manage the family finances, but now filled with positive planning for the future rather than desperate calculations for survival. "I can never thank you enough for noticing what was happening with Tyler," she told Emma with genuine emotion. "Most people just saw a quiet kid who liked the library. You saw a child carrying an adult load." "Tyler made himself noticeable by being exceptional," Emma replied. "I just paid attention to the story behind the behavior." The conversation turned to Tyler's academic progress, which had accelerated dramatically in the second half of the year once basic needs and family stability were addressed. His test scores ranked among the highest in the grade, and his writing portfolio demonstrated remarkable growth. Plans were discussed for advanced coursework in the coming year, particularly in mathematics and language arts where his talents were most pronounced. As summer approached, Emma helped connect Tyler with a free academic camp focused on science and creative writing, two areas where he showed particular promise. The program included meals and extended hours that aligned with his mother's work schedule, addressing both educational enrichment and practical family needs. On the last day of school, Tyler stopped by Emma's classroom after final dismissal, carrying a carefully wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this," he said, showing unusual shyness for a student who had regained so much confidence over the past months. "To say thank you for, everything." The gift was a journal, its cover decorated with images of open doors and windows. Inside, Tyler had written an inscription. "Some people just see a locked door. Others knock to find out why. Thank you for knocking, Ms. Bennett." The simple sincerity of the message, acknowledging how Emma's persistence in connecting with him despite his efforts to isolate himself had ultimately changed his family's trajectory, brought tears to her eyes. "I'm going to use this to record story ideas," she told him with a smile. "And whenever I look at it, I'll remember that sometimes the best stories are the ones we help other people write for themselves." The following September, Emma stood proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Family Resource Center at Oak Ridge Middle School. Jessica Reynolds spoke briefly about her own experience as a struggling single mother and the difference that school-based support had made for her family. Tyler stood beside her, taller after a summer growth spurt, his expression reflecting well-deserved pride in his mother and their journey together. The center itself represented a systemic response to the needs Emma had identified through Tyler's situation, creating accessible support for families experiencing financial hardship, housing insecurity, or other challenges that impacted students' educational experience. Resources that had once required navigating multiple agencies and complicated application processes were now available in a familiar, non-stigmatizing environment, with guidance from staff who understood both educational and social service systems. Principal Morales credited Emma's advocacy in her remarks. "This center exists because one teacher looked beyond a student's behavior to understand his circumstances, and then insisted we do better as an institution to support families like his." 1 year after Emma had first noticed Tyler disappearing into the library every lunch period, she walked through the halls of Oak Ridge Middle School and saw the concrete results of that simple observation. Tyler was now an 8th grader, surrounded by friends as he moved between classes, his backpack containing actual schoolwork rather than family financial records. His science fiction stories had expanded into a planned series, with encouragement from both his English and science teachers who recognized his unique ability to blend creativity with mathematical precision. More broadly, the Family Resource Center had already connected dozens of families with supports ranging from food assistance and healthcare access to employment services and parenting classes. Jessica Reynolds, continuing her role as parent liaison while completing her medical office certification, had become a trusted bridge between vulnerable families and available resources, her personal experience lending credibility to her guidance. In her classroom that afternoon, Emma looked out at her new group of 7th graders, wondering which of them might be carrying invisible burdens behind quiet exteriors or behavioral challenges. The journal Tyler had given her sat on her desk, a reminder to look beyond the surface, to consider the circumstances that shaped each student's capacity to engage and thrive. Recovery hadn't been instant for Tyler or his mother. The financial stability they now enjoyed had been built step by step, with occasional setbacks along the way. The emotional patterns, Tyler's hypervigilance, Jessica's shame and overwhelm, had required consistent counseling to address. But the foundation for security had finally been laid, allowing the slow work of healing to begin. The systems, too, had changed: new resources, better coordination, increased awareness. Small but significant steps toward ensuring no child would need to hide in the library, silently bearing adult responsibilities while their education and childhood slipped away. The story that had begun with a teacher's curiosity about a student's lunchtime habits had transformed not only individual lives but institutional responses to family needs. As Emma prepared for her afternoon classes, she reflected on the ripple effects of simply paying attention, how noticing one child's struggle had ultimately created support systems for many families. Not an ending, but the beginning of a new approach to educational equity that recognized learning couldn't happen when basic needs weren't met. In that moment, she renewed her commitment to the principle that had led her to discover Tyler's situation. Every behavior tells a story, and sometimes the most important thing an educator can do is listen closely enough to hear the unspoken narrative beneath a child's actions. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.
When a school counselor notices a 10-year-old boy who never removes his thick jacket, even during PE class and outdoor activities in 85-degree weather, every instinct tells her something is terribly wrong. Week after week, the child suffers through obvious overheating rather than take off that jacket, becoming physically ill from heat exhaustion, but still refusing to remove it. What she discovered when she made an unexpected home visit would expose a nightmare hidden in plain sight that shattered everything she thought she knew about the boy's family. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe in fighting for children who have no voice, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that matter. At first, Dr. Sarah Chen thought the child had a medical condition, until she saw what was underneath that jacket, and called 911 immediately. Dr. Sarah Chen had been a licensed clinical social worker and school counselor for 19 years, and in that time she developed what colleagues called an almost supernatural ability to detect when children were hiding traumatic secrets. Her office at Riverside Elementary, positioned strategically near the main entrance where she could observe daily arrival and dismissal patterns, had become a sanctuary for students dealing with everything from academic anxiety to severe family trauma. The space reflected her clinical training: comfortable seating arranged to facilitate therapeutic conversation, calming earth tones chosen for their psychological impact, and walls decorated with inspirational artwork that conveyed messages of hope and resilience. At 46, Sarah brought extensive experience from her previous career as a child and family therapist at the County Mental Health Center, where she'd spent 11 years specializing in trauma recovery and family systems therapy. Her transition to school-based counseling had been motivated by her belief in early intervention, identifying and addressing problems within children's daily environments, rather than waiting for crises to reach clinical severity, requiring intensive therapeutic treatment. Sarah's approach to counseling was grounded in systemic thinking and trauma-informed practice, understanding that children's behaviors often served protective functions that made perfect sense within their family contexts, even when those behaviors appeared problematic or concerning to school personnel. Her office reflected this philosophy, featuring therapeutic tools and resources designed to help children express complex emotions and experiences that might be too difficult or dangerous to articulate directly. The school served an economically diverse community in Central Texas, where families ranged from oil industry executives and medical professionals to agricultural workers and service employees struggling with housing costs and job instability. Sarah had developed expertise in recognizing how different forms of family stress, financial pressure, immigration concerns, substance abuse, domestic violence, mental illness, could manifest in children's school behavior and academic performance. Her caseload included students dealing with typical developmental challenges like social anxiety and peer conflict, as well as more complex situations involving family violence, neglect, and various forms of abuse. Sarah's clinical training had taught her to look beyond surface behaviors to understand the underlying emotional and psychological needs that children were attempting to meet through their actions, even when those actions seemed counterproductive or self-defeating. On this particular Thursday morning in mid-May, Sarah was reviewing her weekly schedule when she noticed 10-year-old Marcus Williams walking past her office window toward his fourth-grade classroom, moving with the careful, deliberate gait she'd learned to associate with children experiencing physical discomfort or emotional distress. Despite the forecast predicting temperatures reaching 85 degrees, Marcus was wearing the same thick, dark green military-style jacket he'd worn every single day since transferring to Riverside Elementary in February. This was the 14th consecutive week Sarah had observed Marcus wearing the heavy jacket, regardless of weather conditions, indoor temperatures, or physical activities. Even more concerning was his obvious physical distress when wearing it during warm weather. She'd witnessed him becoming dizzy and nauseous during outdoor activities, requiring frequent water breaks and rest periods, yet he consistently refused to remove the jacket even when explicitly encouraged by teachers and school staff. Marcus Williams had been on Sarah's priority observation list since his enrollment 3 months earlier, when he'd transferred from another district following what his enrollment records described as a family relocation for employment opportunities. However, the limited documentation accompanying his transfer, combined with several concerning behavioral patterns Sarah had observed, suggested that the move might have been motivated by factors more complex than simple job changes. Unlike most new students who displayed typical adjustment behaviors like shyness or uncertainty about school routines, Marcus had arrived at Riverside Elementary with what Sarah recognized as hyper-vigilant defensive strategies more commonly seen in children who had experienced trauma or were living in chronically unsafe environments. He was unfailingly polite and compliant with adult requests, but his interactions seemed scripted and careful, as if he were constantly monitoring his behavior to avoid triggering negative consequences. Most significantly, Marcus displayed extreme anxiety around any activities that required removing clothing or exposing his body, even in appropriate contexts like PE class or medical examinations. He had never participated in physical education activities, always requesting to sit out due to not feeling well or forgetting his PE clothes, despite multiple attempts by staff to accommodate his needs and preferences. Sarah's clinical experience had taught her that children who consistently avoided exposing their bodies often had compelling reasons for maintaining constant coverage, and those reasons frequently involved concealing evidence of abuse or neglect that they had been instructed to hide from outside observation. During her lunch break, Sarah decided to review Marcus's file more comprehensively, looking for patterns that might explain his extreme attachment to the jacket and his resistance to normal school activities requiring appropriate seasonal clothing. What she found was both limited and concerning, suggesting deliberate efforts to minimize information available to school personnel. Marcus's academic records showed inconsistent performance across multiple schools in different states over the past 2 years, with frequent transfers that appeared to occur mid-semester without clear educational justification. His medical records were similarly sparse, lacking the detailed vaccination histories and health assessments typically required for school enrollment, suggesting either poor record-keeping or intentional avoidance of comprehensive medical evaluation. Most troubling, Sarah noticed that Marcus had never had emergency contacts beyond his immediate family, and attempts to reach his listed guardians often resulted in disconnected phone numbers or delayed responses. This isolation from extended family or community support networks was often indicative of families attempting to avoid external scrutiny of their living situations or treatment of children. Sarah also reviewed comments from Marcus's teachers, looking for additional perspectives on his behavior and academic engagement. What she found painted a concerning picture of a child who was academically capable but emotionally withdrawn, displaying the kind of perfectionist anxiety often seen in children who faced harsh consequences for normal childhood mistakes or academic struggles. His current teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had documented multiple instances where Marcus had become extremely distressed over minor errors in his work, sometimes crying uncontrollably when he made mistakes that other children would simply erase and correct. This disproportionate reaction to normal learning processes suggested a child who had been conditioned to fear making mistakes through experience with punitive responses to imperfection. Most significantly, Marcus's PE teacher, Coach Thompson, had attempted multiple accommodations to help Marcus participate in physical activities while wearing his jacket, but had observed that the child became increasingly distressed when his jacket was even slightly displaced, or when activities required arm movements that might cause the jacket to shift, or reveal anything underneath. The cumulative evidence suggested that Marcus was concealing something beneath his jacket that he had been specifically instructed to hide from adult observation. Sarah's clinical training and experience with abused children led her to suspect that he was hiding evidence of physical abuse. But she also understood that direct confrontation about his clothing choices could potentially worsen his situation if her suspicions were correct. Sarah decided to begin with gentle attempts to build therapeutic rapport with Marcus, creating opportunities for private conversation that might eventually lead to voluntary disclosure about his circumstances. She arranged for Marcus to visit her office during his lunch period for what she described to his teacher as routine check-ins for new students to ensure successful academic and social adjustment. When Marcus arrived at her office that afternoon, Sarah immediately noticed his obvious physical discomfort from wearing the heavy jacket in the building's air-conditioned but still warm environment. Perspiration was visible on his forehead, and his breathing seemed slightly labored, but he made no move to unzip or remove the jacket despite the obvious heat stress. "Audrey." "Hi, Marcus," Sarah greeted warmly, gesturing toward the comfortable seating area away from her desk to create a less formal, more therapeutic atmosphere. "Thanks for coming by. I like to meet with all our new students to see how they're adjusting to Riverside Elementary and whether there's anything I can help with." Marcus settled carefully into the indicated chair, his posture remaining rigid and defensive throughout the interaction. Sarah noted that he kept his arms positioned to prevent any gaping or shifting of his jacket, suggesting practiced concealment behaviors. "How are things going for you here at our school?" Sarah asked, beginning with an open-ended question, while observing Marcus's nonverbal responses and general presentation. "Everything's fine," Marcus replied with the automatic response Sarah had learned to recognize from children who had been coached to deflect questions about their well-being. "I like the teachers, and the other kids are nice." Sarah recognized the polite but superficial response that many troubled children provided when asked about their experiences. "I'm glad you're finding good things about being here. Sometimes when kids move to new schools, there are parts that feel harder or more challenging. Are there any aspects of school that feel difficult right now?" Marcus considered the question carefully before responding, his hesitation suggesting internal calculation about what was safe to reveal. "Sometimes I get tired during the day. The schedule is different from my old school." The mention of fatigue provided an opening for Sarah to explore his physical well-being without directly addressing the jacket issue. "That makes sense. Adjusting to new routines can be exhausting. Do you feel like you're getting enough sleep at night?" "Usually," Marcus answered, though his voice carried uncertainty that suggested either sleep problems or reluctance to discuss his home environment in detail. "I've noticed you wear your jacket every day, even when it's really warm outside," Sarah observed gently, careful to keep her tone curious rather than challenging. "That's a really nice jacket. It looks very warm and comfortable." The change in Marcus was immediate and noticeable. His already rigid posture became even more defensive, his hands moved protectively toward his jacket, and his breathing quickened slightly. "I get cold easily," he said quickly. "My mom says I need to stay warm so I don't get sick." Sarah noted both the defensive response and the reference to maternal instructions about clothing, though she also noted that he had mentioned mom rather than both parents, possibly indicating a single-parent household or family structure where one parent held primary authority over his care. "It's great that your mom wants to make sure you stay healthy," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Do you feel cold right now, even inside where we have air conditioning?" Marcus nodded, though Sarah could observe obvious signs of overheating, including perspiration and flushed complexion that contradicted his claimed coldness. "I have to keep it on. Mom checks every day when I get home to make sure I've been wearing it all day." The daily inspection of Marcus's clothing compliance was immediately concerning to Sarah, representing a level of control and monitoring that extended far beyond normal parental guidance about appropriate dress for weather conditions. Parents who required daily verification of specific clothing choices and checked compliance through inspection were often exercising inappropriate control over their children's bodies and autonomy. "Marcus, can you tell me more about what happens when your mom checks your jacket?" Sarah asked carefully, recognizing that she was approaching potentially sensitive territory about family dynamics and household rules. "She just makes sure I'm following the rules about staying healthy and not taking it off when I'm not supposed to." Marcus's voice became quieter, and Sarah noticed that he was avoiding direct eye contact while providing this explanation. "What happens if you don't follow the clothing rules?" The question prompted a longer hesitation before Marcus answered, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "She gets upset, and she has to remind me about why the rules are important for keeping me safe." The euphemistic language, "gets upset" and "remind me," was consistent with terminology Sarah had heard from other children who were being abused, but had been trained to minimize or disguise the severity of their treatment. The reference to "keeping me safe" was particularly concerning, as abusive parents often justified their controlling or violent behavior by claiming it was necessary for the child's protection or well-being. "What do those reminders look like?" Sarah asked gently, using Marcus's own terminology to avoid triggering defensive responses. "Different things, sometimes talking, sometimes other kinds of reminders that help me remember better why rules are important." The vague reference to other kinds of reminders was a clear euphemism for physical punishment or abuse, particularly when combined with Marcus's obvious fear and the concealment behaviors he had been displaying. Sarah's clinical experience told her that Marcus was very likely hiding evidence of physical abuse beneath his jacket, but she also understood that pushing too hard for immediate disclosure could potentially endanger him if her suspicions were correct. "Marcus, I want you to know that children should never be hurt as a way of helping them remember rules," Sarah said firmly but gently. "Good parents help children learn through kind words, clear explanations, and patience. Physical reminders that cause pain don't actually help children learn. They just make children scared." Marcus looked up at Sarah with obvious surprise, as if this concept was completely foreign to his experience of family relationships and parental guidance. "But how else do kids learn to follow important safety rules if they don't get physical reminders?" The question revealed the depth of psychological manipulation Marcus had experienced, conditioning that had convinced him that violence was not only normal, but necessary for proper child development and safety. This distorted understanding suggested that abuse had been occurring for an extended period and had been systematically justified through twisted logic about child protection and rule following. "Children learn best when they feel safe and loved," Sarah explained gently. "When adults explain rules clearly, help children understand why rules exist, and provide encouragement when children make good choices. Fear and pain actually make it much harder for children to learn and remember things effectively." Marcus studied Sarah's face intently, clearly struggling to reconcile this information with everything he had been taught about discipline and family relationships. "Really?" "Really," Sarah confirmed with absolute conviction. "Marcus, I'm getting the feeling that someone might be using physical reminders to try to teach you rules, and I'm worried that those reminders might be hurting you. If that's happening, it's not your fault, and there are people who can help make sure you're safe." The tears that began forming in Marcus's eyes confirmed Sarah's suspicions, though the child fought to maintain his composure and avoid revealing information that he had clearly been instructed to keep secret. "I can't talk about family business," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying the same coached quality Sarah had observed in his previous responses. "Mom says what happens at home should stay private between family members." That's true for most family matters, Sarah agreed carefully. But when someone is being hurt or scared, especially a child, that's when other adults need to step in to help. Telling trusted adults about someone hurting you isn't breaking family privacy. It's getting the help and protection you deserve. Sarah realized that Marcus had been too thoroughly coached to disclose information during school-based counseling sessions. His responses indicated systematic preparation for deflecting questions about his home life and maintaining family secrets regardless of his personal suffering. She understood that gathering accurate information about his circumstances would require observing his home environment directly. After Marcus returned to class, Sarah made a decision that would prove crucial for his safety and well-being. Rather than continuing to attempt disclosure through traditional counseling approaches, she decided to conduct a home visit under the pretext of discussing Marcus's academic progress and school adjustment with his family. That evening, Sarah drove to the address listed in Marcus's enrollment records, an older apartment complex in a part of town known for transient residents and minimal community oversight. What she observed when she arrived immediately escalated her concerns about Marcus's safety and living conditions. The apartment building showed obvious signs of neglect and poor maintenance, with broken exterior lighting, damaged walkways, and what appeared to be multiple units housing more residents than would be safely or legally appropriate. Sarah could hear loud voices and sounds of conflict coming from several units, suggesting an environment characterized by chronic stress and instability. When Sarah knocked on the door of Marcus's unit, she was greeted by a woman who appeared to be in her 30s, but showed signs of severe stress, possible substance abuse, and what Sarah's clinical experience suggested might be untreated mental illness. The woman identified herself as Marcus's mother, Lisa Williams, and reluctantly agreed to allow Sarah inside to discuss Marcus's school performance. What Sarah observed inside the apartment immediately confirmed her worst fears about Marcus's living situation, while revealing additional horrors that exceeded even her clinical experience with severe abuse cases. The apartment was in a state of extreme neglect, with minimal furniture, no evidence of adequate food storage or preparation, and living conditions that clearly met legal definitions of child endangerment. Most shocking, Sarah discovered why Marcus refused to remove his jacket when she observed him interacting with his mother during the home visit. Lisa Williams was using a sophisticated system of physical restraints and concealment devices to hide evidence of systematic torture she had been inflicting on Marcus for months. Underneath his jacket, Marcus was wearing what appeared to be a makeshift restraint system constructed from belts, rope, and metal hardware that kept his arms positioned against his body while creating constant pressure and discomfort, designed to serve as ongoing punishment for perceived infractions of household rules. The restraints had been causing tissue damage and circulation problems that would have resulted in permanent injury if they had continued much longer. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed involuntarily when she realized what she was seeing, immediately reaching for her cell phone to call emergency services. The restraint system represented a level of systematic torture that went far beyond typical physical abuse, indicating sophisticated planning and implementation of devices specifically designed to cause ongoing suffering while remaining hidden from outside observation. Lisa Williams had been forcing Marcus to wear these restraints constantly, using the jacket to conceal them and coaching him to deflect any questions about his clothing or physical discomfort. The 911 call Sarah made that evening resulted in immediate emergency response from multiple agencies. When paramedics, police, and child protective services arrived at the apartment, they discovered evidence of ongoing torture that required immediate medical intervention and criminal investigation. Marcus was transported to the emergency room, where medical professionals worked to safely remove the restraint devices, while documenting the extensive tissue damage and circulation problems they had caused. The systematic nature and severity of his injuries required immediate treatment to prevent permanent disability and ongoing medical complications. Lisa Williams was arrested that evening and charged with multiple felonies, including child torture, child endangerment, and aggravated assault. Investigation revealed that she had been systematically torturing Marcus for over a year, using increasingly sophisticated methods of concealment to avoid detection, while moving frequently to prevent sustained observation by school personnel or community members. Marcus was placed in emergency foster care with Robert and Maria Gonzalez, experienced therapeutic foster parents who specialized in caring for children recovering from severe trauma and abuse. Their home had been specifically designed to provide healing environments for children who had experienced systematic torture, featuring adaptive equipment for children with temporary disabilities and carefully chosen therapeutic resources. "We're so happy to meet you, Marcus," Maria said gently when Marcus arrived at their home, his arms still bandaged from the medical procedures required to address the damage from his restraints. "We know you've been hurt very badly, but you're completely safe now. Our job is to help you heal and feel comfortable in your own body again." Marcus, now wearing comfortable, loose-fitting clothes provided by the foster family, and freed from the restraints he had endured for months, looked around the unfamiliar environment with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. For the first time in over a year, he could move his arms freely without pain or restriction. "Do I have to wear special clothes?" Marcus asked quietly, this question revealing how central clothing control had become to his understanding of safety and survival. "You can wear whatever feels comfortable and appropriate for the weather," Robert replied with a warm smile. "We want you to learn to listen to your own body about when you're hot or cold, tired or energetic. Those are your feelings, and you have the right to respond to them." The concept of bodily autonomy was revolutionary for Marcus, who had spent months having every aspect of his physical experience controlled and monitored by someone else. Learning to recognize and respond to his own physical needs would be a crucial part of his healing process. Over the following days, Marcus began the gradual process of physical and psychological recovery, though his healing would clearly require extensive medical treatment and therapeutic support. The Gonzalez family, trained in trauma-informed care and experienced with children recovering from torture, provided structure without control, offering Marcus choices he had never been allowed to make while maintaining the security and consistency he needed to begin trusting again. Sarah visited daily, both to monitor Marcus's emotional recovery and to witness the remarkable transformation that freedom from constant restraint and abuse created in a child who had been systematically tortured for months. Within the first week, Marcus was moving more freely, sleeping better, and beginning to display curiosity about normal childhood activities that had been impossible under his previous circumstances. Most significantly, Marcus began asking questions about his body, about normal physical sensations like hunger and tiredness, and about whether he would be able to participate in activities like sports and games that required free movement. These questions represented crucial steps in his healing process and his developing understanding of bodily autonomy and personal rights. 2 weeks after his rescue, law enforcement brought news that ensured Marcus's permanent safety. Lisa Williams had been formally charged with multiple felonies and faced decades in prison for the systematic torture she had inflicted. Investigation revealed that her abuse had escalated following mental health crises that she had refused to address through appropriate treatment channels. More importantly for Marcus's future, the investigation had located his biological father, James Williams, who lived in Colorado and had been searching for Marcus since Lisa had disappeared with him during a custody dispute 2 years earlier. James had been unaware of Marcus's location and circumstances, believing that Lisa had moved to another country with their son. "What this means," the social worker explained to Marcus in terms he could understand, is that you have a father who loves you very much and has been looking for you for a long time. He has a safe home where you can heal completely, and he understands what happened to you and how to help you feel safe. When Marcus met his father James for the first time in 2 years, his reaction was one of overwhelming relief and joy at reconnecting with someone who represented genuine parental love rather than the exploitation and torture he had experienced. "I've been searching everywhere for you," James said tearfully as he carefully embraced his son, being mindful of Marcus's still healing injuries. "I'm going to make sure you're never hurt again, and we're going to take all the time you need to feel completely safe and healthy." 3 weeks after his rescue, Marcus had begun displaying remarkable resilience and healing capacity that amazed even the experienced medical professionals treating his injuries. His natural intelligence and curiosity, which had been suppressed by months of systematic torture, now flourished as he experienced genuine safety and parental protection. Sarah was completing her documentation when Marcus appeared in her office doorway one afternoon, now wearing a comfortable T-shirt that allowed free movement of his arms, a sight that filled her with profound satisfaction and hope. "Dr. Chen, look what I can do now!" Marcus demonstrated full range of motion with his arms, stretching and moving freely without the painful restrictions he had endured for so long. "The doctors say my arms are getting completely better, and I can start playing sports if I want to." The simple demonstration of normal physical movement represented how much healing had occurred. Marcus reclaiming basic bodily functions and beginning to explore normal childhood activities that had been impossible under his previous circumstances. "That's wonderful, Marcus," Sarah said, feeling tears of joy at the complete transformation from a systematically tortured child to a healthy boy exploring his physical capabilities. "I'm so happy that you can move freely and that your body is healing." "Dad says we're going to Colorado, where I can go to a new school and maybe join the baseball team," Marcus announced proudly. "And he promises that no one will ever hurt me again or make me wear things that hurt." As Marcus headed back to his classroom, moving with the confident stride of a child who had reclaimed ownership of his own body, Sarah reflected on the transformation she'd witnessed. In the space of just weeks, a systematically tortured child had become someone who could express excitement about his future and trust in protective relationships. 4 months later, Sarah received a letter that filled her with professional satisfaction and personal joy. Marcus and his father had settled successfully in Colorado, where Marcus was thriving in every aspect of his recovery. His letter included photos of him playing baseball, swimming, and participating in normal childhood activities that showcased his complete physical healing. "Dr. Chen," Marcus had written in careful handwriting, "I wanted to thank you for saving me and helping me get my body back. I love being able to move freely and wear clothes that feel good. I'm helping other kids at my new school who seem scared because you taught me that helping others is how we show we're grateful for good things that happen to us." The letter demonstrated Marcus's complete transformation from a victim of systematic torture to a child who could think about helping others facing similar struggles, representing the highest possible outcome for intervention in severe abuse cases. Stories like these remind us that school counselors serve as crucial advocates for vulnerable children, combining clinical expertise with systematic observation to identify those suffering in silence behind carefully maintained facades. Every day, heroes like Sarah are making these life-saving discoveries through willingness to look beyond surface behaviors and investigate when children's actions suggest hidden trauma. But how many children are still concealing systematic abuse behind innocent explanations, waiting for someone to care enough to discover the truth and provide the help they desperately need? Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.